Good morning, this is your AI host, Jay. I'm here with the automatically generated Journato morning headlines on October 11, 2022. Russia-Ukraine war live. Reports of strikes overnight in Zaporizhzhia, G7 and Zelensky to hold crisis talks. The Guardian, Truss and G7 leaders to meet after latest Russian assault on Ukraine. The Independent, UK's Truss to tell G7, stick by Ukraine in face of Russian attacks. Reuters UK, Ukraine to demand step change in Western aid after Russian missile blitz. The Guardian, Russia-Ukraine war latest, G7 leaders to hold crisis talks after Russia's deadly revenge attacks. Rescued in the nick of time, crew of sinking fishing boat fight off sharks with their hands. Sky News, boaters who went missing on a fishing trip were rescued by the US Coast Guard as they fended off shark attacks. CNN, 2 from sunken boat fend off sharks during Coast Guard rescue. Thomas Dooley, T heard arrest over Tralee funeral killing. BBC, third arrest in connection with fatal attack in Tralee. RTE, i.e., third man arrested over fatal attack at Tralee funeral. The Irish Times, third man arrested in connection with Tralee cemetery killing. Independent.ie, third man arrested over murder of Thomas Dooley in Tralee cemetery. Immensely brave, Abdul-Jalil al-Singhas named International Writer of Courage. Russian hackers suspected over cyber attack on US airports. The Independent, pro-Russian hacktivists claim credit for attacks on airport websites. Bloomberg, some airport websites go offline, cause being investigated. Nika Shakarami, video show Iran teenager protesting before death. Russian ex-president Medvedev on Kyiv wanted list. Reuters, Ukraine latest news, terrorists must be neutralized, Kyiv defiant as Russian bombs rain down on cities, Putin issues warning, ex-Russian PM on wanted list. Japan opens borders to tourists as last pandemic travel restrictions eased. The Guardian, tourists flock to Japan after COVID restrictions lifted. The Independent, Japan reopens to tourists despite headwinds. Reuters, Japan eases travel restrictions, betting on tourism recovery from COVID. Bloomberg, Japan eager to welcome tourists from abroad amid cheap yen. Ukraine war, shocking number of Russian corpses a grim illustration of Ukrainian battlefield success. North Korea says missile launches were nuclear attack simulation on South. Ukraine war, Russian hawks celebrate deadly response to Crimea setback. Air France crash, aviation bosses heckled as trial begins. BBC, Air France and Airbus to face involuntary manslaughter charges over crash, BBC News. BBC News, final minutes of Air France flight AF 447 to be examined as trial opens. The Guardian, angry relatives of plane crash victims shout at Air France and Airbus bosses during manslaughter trial. Sky News, families of Air France crash victims vent anger. Donegal explosion, this tiny Irish hamlet, proudly associated with the sound of music, has been left with a terrible silence. Sky News, first funerals of Creeslock explosion victims to take place, ITV News. ITV News, Creeslock explosion, my first thought was getting people away. BBC, Creeslock community urged to speak out to help process tragedy. Evening Standard, groups huddle together as family and friends lay floral tributes in Creeslock. UK announces sanctions against Iran's morality police. The Guardian, Iran protests, UK sanctions morality police over violent crackdown. BBC, UK sanctions Iran's morality police for human rights violations. The Telegraph, UK sanctions Iran's morality police following death of Mahsa Amini. Sky News, Iran's morality police sanctioned by UK following death of Mahsa Amini and widespread protests. Ukraine war, US condemns brutal Russian strikes on Ukraine. BBC, why is Russia launching fresh strikes on Ukrainian cities? BBC News. BBC News, keeping up with the U-turns, the readout with Allegra Stratton. Bloomberg, opinions divided in Moscow after Kremlin's escalation in Ukraine. Sky News, editorial, Putin is gambling that the West will abandon Ukraine, we want. This was all for the news. Thanks for listening. Please do not forget to like and subscribe.